Perfect. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. Today, we are going to be having a really interesting discussion around clinical trials. As a patient organization, I think we've realized that there's a lot of misconceptions with regards to clinical trials, and very often, I think as patients, we feel a little bit intimidated by everything that's involved in clinical trials. So we wanted to debunk some of the myths and to have a very obviously fruitful discussion around what clinical trials are, how you can find out what's happening in clinical trials, where you can get credible information, what the definitions are, etc. And just essentially what is kind of happening in the clinical trial space in South Africa. I think the last couple of days have really shown us that South Africa is on the forefront of a lot of research. And I think it gives us a little bit of pride to know that we actually are really advanced a lot of the time in some of the research. So it's been a very encouraging week, and also somewhat despondent, obviously with relation to what's happened in the COVID environment. But I think if you look down at the finer details, it's been really encouraging to see that once again we have done everything possible, and we've also been a collaborative country, which I think has been very encouraging. So we really look forward to our discussions today. We're going to be joined by three very interesting speakers who will be giving us different perspectives and viewpoints on everything that is clinical trials. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you would like to ask any questions and you have joined us, I've done all of that and things have not actually come through, I see. We are now bringing our participants in. So sorry about that. There was a bit of a technical glitch, but we are discussing everything clinical trials related today. And we're going to be joined by three very interesting speakers. If you have any questions, we would like to encourage all our participants to make use of either the Q&A section, please excuse the background noise. I have no power at home, so I'm here at a coffee shop. The Q&A section, which you can either ask a question anonymously and we will then answer it. If you make use of the chat function to speak to other delegates, which you are able to do, or to comment around the narrative that's taking place, you can do that, but it is not necessarily the best place to ask questions if you are on the Zoom section of this call, simply because of the fact that sometimes we lose those questions. So the Q&A function is definitely the better option. And finally, if you are joining us on social media, you can pop comments and questions into the Facebook comment feed, and we will pick them up there, and someone from our team will notify us, and we can then hopefully discuss them during the Q&A session. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. First up, we have Thulang Sehlolo, who is the Senior Manager of Clinical Evaluations at SAHPRA. And I'm sure many of you will know that SAHPRA is the South African Health Regulations Authority, and they are responsible for registering all products and everything with regards to registration of clinical trials. So I'm going to hand over to you, Thulang.
Thanks very much, Kelly, and thanks to Rare Diseases South Africa. I seem to be disabled for share screen. I'm not quite sure whether you'd want me to...
Let me try and address that quickly.
Okay, my apologies.
There we go. You should be able to share your screen now.
Wonderful. Let me do that. And share. And do the presentation mode, if I can. Wonderful. So that's the presentation mode. Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks, Kelly, again, for this opportunity, like you said, to debunk some of the myths around clinical trials and, just explain to the public in terms of how these are defined, conducted, and monitored by the regulatory authority. As you can see, I'm from SAHPRA, Senior Manager Clinical Evaluations, and this function would fall under my domain. Now, the first issue that I would like to address as briefly as possible is what is a clinical trial. This is a very simplified definition. It's any formal research activity that involves animals or humans with the purpose of investigating the safety and or efficacy of healthcare interventions to solve for a health problem. Now, a clinical trial would obviously happen in phases. We have the preclinical phase, phase, which involve laboratory studies and animal studies, which are collectively called laboratory studies, or we can even call it non-clinical studies. Now, these provide information on the dosing and toxicity levels of whatever that we try to test for any disease. And then you have phase 1, which are first in human studies, where we test safety and toxicity again in humans. And these involve a small number of patients because we're not sure yet about what we are testing. So it involves a smaller number of patients. And as we gain confidence with the data, safety data that we have gathered from phase 1 studies, then we'll go to phase 2 studies. Most of the time, phase 1 and 2, seamlessly migrate into each other, such that in phase 1, you would do also what we call dose finding studies, as well as safety in terms of which dose is safe and tolerable. So as we move to phase 2, you get a larger number of patients where safety and dosing will further be characterized, and monitoring of side effects, which is part of safety, check which dose works best, and check preliminary effectiveness at the given dose and at the given safety profile. And then we move over to phase 3, safety and efficacy studies, where you have a large number of patients. They run into thousands sometimes, which to confirm the efficacy and to further monitor safety. And then there's the last phase, which is phase 4 for post-marketing safety and effectiveness. Here, we gather information on the drug's effects in various populations, which would not have been part of the clinical trial because of various exclusion and inclusion criteria that go into clinical trial research. And obviously, long-term use as well comes into play. And here, you're dealing with real-world data. You're dealing with a high number of patients, and they tend to take longer as we explore long-term effects. And just ignore that blue bar that says FDA approval. That should actually say regulatory approval. But anyway, that's not a problem. And one thing that I will come back to would be the preclinical lab studies, which have been very topical, especially during this coronavirus epidemic, that we were too quick with the vaccines, where enough safety studies done. The point that I can make there is that this messenger RNA vaccine technology has been around for quite a while. It was first tested for HIV, it was then tested for Ebola. So we know a lot about the messenger RNA vaccine platforms. So there should not be any anxiety in terms of the speed at which we moved to phase 1 studies in this coronavirus context. But I'm sure it will come in some of the questions, and we'll address it more thoroughly than with my colleagues on the call, I'm sure. Now, do trials differ? Yes, they do differ. You have interventional trials, which I've just described, phase 1, 2, and 3, where you want to find out whether a medicine works for a particular disease. These tend to be randomized. Sometimes they get non-randomized, but they are closely controlled clinical trial design to answer questions as simple as how safe and efficacious COVID-19 vaccines in preventing infections. Whether you get, sometimes a mix between phase 2 and phase 3 as we migrate towards the higher phase. And that you have non-interventional trials. These are not controlled or monitored by SAPRA. Let me first stress that interventional trials are monitored and controlled by SAPRA, and I will elaborate more on that as we proceed through the presentation. And then you get non-interventional trials, Like I said, not controlled or monitored by SAPRA, but we want to be notified and we want the outcomes to be reported to SAPRA because those outcomes may point to new issues about the drug, either in terms of enhanced efficacy or in terms of worsening safety outcomes. And then we're able to take a regulatory decision in terms of whether that drug should continue to be on the market or the packaging set, what we now call the professional information, should be amended to indicate a new safety concern or anything that may be of interest for a regulatory authority. Now, these are typically observational. No medicine is administered by the researcher. We use real-world data to monitor safety and effectiveness in the larger population. Now, the study designs could be cohort, and cohort can be prospective or, case control, nested case control, etc. These are all the observational study designs that are normally used for phase 4 clinical trials. Now, to complicate matters, I will give you an example that has arisen with the coronavirus vaccine trials. For instance, a question like how many fully vaccinated people develop breakthrough infections. Typically, this would be a phase 4 study, but because of the natural history of this disease and how fast things evolve, you are working on a vaccine today, and tomorrow there's a new variant, and you're not sure how well that variant works, and you start seeing breakthrough infections. You put in a secondary question in your phase 3 trial to monitor for these breakthrough infections because they are an adverse event. Let's put it like that. They're an adverse event of interest for all regulators. So yeah, that's just one complexity. You get all sorts of permutations with clinical trials, but the main issues I will talk to in subsequent slides. Now, what is SAPRA's legal mandate in all of this? The Medicines Act has sections which require SAPRA to ensure that clinical trial protocols are assessed according to prescribed ethical and professional criteria and defined standards. Now, what do we mean by ethical criteria? Now, I have to make reference to the Helsinki Declaration of 1964, and it has subsequently been amended and strengthened over the years, which is the bedrock of clinical research ethics. And some of the ethical criteria that we also take into consideration involve research data handling and integrity. We need to prevent data falsification. We need protection of participants' rights. They need to know what they are signing up for by way of informed consent. We need to prevent exploitation and unfairness. Robust scientific rationale must be advanced for clinical research. We do not allow clinical research just out of idle curiosity. There has to be a robust scientific rationale for that research to happen, because you're dealing with human beings who need to be protected from exploitation and unfairness. And then the professional criteria that we're talking about, we insist on qualified investigators, and those are the international standards that are defined in the Good Clinical Practice Guideline that we published the latest edition of end of 2020. Qualified investigators and researchers acting within their scope of registered current professional practice. They need to be registered with their professional association, and they need to be acting within their scope of practice within a clinical trial setting. So those are the professional criteria, some of the professional criteria that we look for. Now, how does SAPRA control clinical trials? We do that through protocol approval before the trial can commence. Now, the protocol approval process will only happen when the trial protocol satisfies the requirements of ethics, qualified researchers, scientific validity, patient protections, and data integrity. Yeah? And any amendments during the trial need to be approved by us before they can be implemented during the trial. Participants must have an opportunity to give written informed consent before participating. I've touched on this. Participants must be insured against harm, injury when participating in the trial. Participants must be reimbursed for any costs related to their participation in the trial, and participants must be guaranteed post-trial access to the study medication if needed. So those are some of the issues that we look at when we, during the protocol approval process. Now, how does SAPRA monitor clinical trials? The trial sites must be available for inspection at any time. We do have good clinical practice inspectors whose job it is to monitor clinical trial sites as and when needed. The researchers must give frequent progress reports and safety updates to SAPRA during the trials. Now, the frequency would depend on the risk of the intervention being studied. These progress reports, we've requested progress reports from anything from 2 weekly to 6 weekly, depending on the issues that we pick up during protocol evaluation and from our knowledge of the active substance that is being tested. Serious safety events must be reported to SAPRA as soon as possible after they occur for us to decide whether the trial should proceed or not, or whether the trial should proceed with additional conditions. So these are the measures that we have put in place in order to execute our mandate as prescribed by Act 101 in terms of clinical trials in South Africa. Kelly, I think I've reached the end of my presentation and I've kept within the time that has been allocated to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tulang. I think some very, very interesting points that were made there, particularly around the participants' responsibilities, which I think, you know, sometimes I suppose as participants, we almost so excited to get access to a clinical trial that you forget that you actually have a role to play in the long-term outcomes of that trial. So very, very important to mention. And I'm sure that that will come up in some of the comment sections. Next up, thank you very, very much for keeping within the time period. I appreciate it. Next up, we have Dr. Patel, who's the Principal Investigative Officer at the RITS Reproductive Health and HIV Institute. And we're going to be seeing a little bit of a different dynamic, I suppose, from an investigator side of things and what to look out for there. So Dr. Patel, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Kelly. You'll just have to let me be able to share. You seem to have disabled mine as well.
Sorry, I'm not 100% sure why that has happened. Let me do that. It should be working now.
Okay. Please just let me know that you can see my screen.
It is sharing. If you can just turn it into slideshow view or presentation view.
Great.
There we go.
Okay. So, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you for making time for this particular discussion. It's quite important for us to be able to have these sorts of opportunities to discuss what for us seemed quite basic information, but it's just because it's our world and we don't often get a chance to share it with a large number of people. So thank you for this. My name is Dr. Faisal Patel, and I am both a principal investigator of many studies as well as a sub-investigator on quite a few. I work for the WITS Reproductive Health and HIV Institute, which some of you may have seen around on the news. Our director, executive director, is Professor Helen Rees. She has connections both with SAPRA, and she is very active in the space around COVID vaccines at the moment. So just to give you some background about WITS RHI is we've actually celebrated 25 years of our institute about 2 years ago. So we've been around for a while. Moved a couple of spaces, originally started at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, and then had moved to our new spaces. When I say new, it's Binoha, in Hillbrow. And this is exactly where we're at. We're situated next to the Hillbrow Community Health Center, next to Esalen Street Clinic, and the quite a big building, which you can see on the left-hand side of the first picture, which is the old Wits University Nurses Home, which is behind the Florence, which used to be a midwife delivery facility. And all of this is just behind Constitution Hill, so not too far from Charlotte Makeke Academic Hospital or Moore Park Hospital or Brenthurst Clinic, for example. Okay. The second picture is a picture of my office balcony, which has a very pretty view of the city centre of Hillbrow. And this is one of the murals that we have on our walls, and what we try to do is to help breathe new life into Hillbrow as a city centre in a very vibrant community. And a lot of the work is not just around infections and problems that affect Hillbrow. We just happen to be on the edge of it because it's in the centre of Joburg. But we try to do work in a large amount of fields, and the focus for us at Vitsarijai Shandukani Centre, which is very much around maternal and child health. And this is why this particular mural, it talks quite a bit to us. Okay, so I'm going to just show you some representations of where we're at. The top picture on your left is one of our heritage sites in Joburg. It's the Hugh Solomon building. It's where we run majority of our admin work from. The bottom left corner is the labor ward and antenatal clinic in the Hillbrow healthcare facility. And just above that is where our original building and research unit was, and it's quite small. As you can see, it's about 4 or 5 offices long. The top right-hand corner now is where we're at the moment. We've moved into this particular building last year, March, and we're now running 3 complete floors in a rather large building. One floor is specifically dedicated to maternal and child health. So moms who are pregnant and looking at specific infections, which are quite important for us to know about specifically in our country and in our populations. Another floor, which is specifically pediatric in nature, and a third floor, which is particularly COVID in nature. And when we moved into this particular building in March last year, was just before we started running our very first COVID vaccine trial in this country. That was the COVID AstraZeneca Chadox vaccine trial. So focus is not just on one specific population. We look at men and women. We look at participants who are newborns to moms who are pregnant, children who are in their infancy to children who are adolescents. And with COVID vaccine trials, we've ended up having quite a large amount of geriatric patients who are also on some of our trials. So a large amount of variety in the population groups in which we work. Okay. This is just to give you an idea of some of the work we do, to explain to you the breadth of it. 2 very big networks that we work with are the Impact Network and the MTN Network. Both of these networks are American-based in their funding. They do work across many different countries. We work with them specifically because the Impact Network is a network that looks specifically at HIV and TB in the pediatric population. And this is our focus. The MTN network works around looking at preventative measures for both STDs and for HIV, and this is also some of the work that we do. We've been working with these networks for many, many years, and the MTN network has just recently closed down, but the Impact Network has been growing from strength to strength, and is a network that we work with very actively. We also work with some of the big pharmaceutical companies. We have worked with MSD before, specifically around vaccinations and pneumococcal vaccines. We're currently running some trials with them, specifically looking at ARVs, so antiretroviral therapies that are novel. Antiretroviral therapies are not yet registered in our country, but are potentially being used in first world countries, having been registered with the FDA. And these drugs are not currently available in our country, but potentially these participants are benefiting from being on drugs that they wouldn't have access to when they are potentially failing on the current drug regimens they are on. Okay. The Pfizer vaccine trials we're currently doing spans quite a few different bacteria, viruses. We do one that is specifically looking at preventing RSV, which is a virus that infects babies at a young age and makes them quite ill enough to require an ICU bed. Another one is group B streptococcal infections in moms and preventing that from having an infection in their babies. Also quite a severe disease, especially in a newborn baby, which can cause quite significant dysregulation of both the neurological system as well as the rest of their body. They can end up having cerebral palsy from these infections. GSK, which is also one of the companies we've done a lot of ARV work with, and the Janssen group, which obviously majority of people now know because of the J&J vaccines for COVID. So besides working with Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Janssen, we have run some of the biggest COVID vaccine trials in the country. Okay. We also run what is called a pregnancy exposure register, which is not specifically a trial, more of an observational study, which looks specifically at moms from the time they book at their pregnancy at an ANC to the time the baby is delivered, to look at exposures of this particular population to a variety of drugs, whether that is recreational or prescription or over-the-counter medications, as well as environmental influences, to look at the birth outcomes for the baby as well as the maternal outcomes for the mom. And some of this work is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the CDC. Okay. So as I said, we cover quite a large variety of infectious diseases. This is our field. HIV in all of the populations, TB, preventative measures as well as treatment measures in both, looking at drug-sensitive TB, so TB that's relatively easy to treat versus XDR or MDR TB, which is rather difficult and requires a lot of medication and in-hospital drug therapy, as well as complications around how to prevent those complex TB diseases from infecting our youth. The group B strep and RSV vaccines, as I've said. And one of the other trials that we run is a rotavirus trial, which is a trial we do with a team in India, because rotavirus is quite a severe infection that can cause diarrhea and vomiting, especially in our third world countries, to a state where the children become so dehydrated and it can lead to death. So these are all concerns that bother us in the environments that we're in, and not necessarily first world countries. But this is the focus because we have to tailor it to our communities. And obviously at this point in time, the thing everyone's talking about is COVID-19. Yeah. So this is just some of the work we've done around COVID-19. As I've said, we've done all of the COVID vaccine trials. At the moment, we're running the booster vaccinations for the J&J participants on our original ensemble trial. That's the trial that proved J&J's efficacy, which then resulted in the outroll of Sisonke. The Pfizer vaccine trial we're currently doing in a small group of pregnant ladies in our community. And obviously the AstraZeneca trial, which everyone knows from the news, was what we found when we got the beta strain outbreak in our country, and proved that AstraZeneca vaccine did not work as well with the beta strain as it did with the original virus, but seems to work quite well with the Delta strain, which came soon after. Okay. So majority of you have had some interaction with the Sisonke trial. And now the Sisonke 2 trial, which is doing booster vaccinations for healthcare workers. And this is not a classic version of a clinical trial by any means. It's a phase 3B trial, which basically was run in order to get access to a vaccine which wasn't registered yet by SAPRA, but being able to give this vaccine to a large amount of people who were obviously in a great need for this particular vaccine at the time. So the Sisonke trials are not classic trials by any means, and I would not use them as yardsticks. Okay, so as Lelang has explained about phases of trials and how we work through them, we've run quite a few phase 2, phase 3, and even phase 4 trials. And these are all different in their aspects, and they can be quite complicated as they get bigger with the large amount of numbers. But the smaller trials, phase 2 trials, can be quite difficult because they're looking specifically at this safety and the efficacy, and they're quite intense, both on the staff members as well as the participants who have very frequent visits, for example, have quite a bit of blood tests done and are required to fill out quite a lot of information around diaries and information post-vaccinations or post taking treatment orally. We do have quite a large number of ways to do diaries, and some of them are paper-based, old school way, and some of them are electronic diaries where we give people an electronic device. Often it's quite a large cell phone device, which is then allowing them to use an app, which allows them to electronically capture information around their post-vaccination status for a certain number of days. Okay, so what we end up doing is usually it takes quite a long time to get from the start of a drug discovery to doing preclinical trials to doing licensure. And this is the normal state at which we work. Majority of the time, trials start with adults, and once the trial has been proven to be effective and the doses are found in adults, we move down to smaller age groups. Usually then move down to the ages of 12 to 18. Once we've worked through that age group, we go down to the ages of 6 to 12, and then go to less than 6. And that's sort of the standard. So once a drug is registered in an adult does not mean it is registered in children. Those trials still need to be done, mostly because the body of a child is very different from the body of an adult. In the same way, the body of a female who's pregnant is very different from a body of a male or a female who is not pregnant. Your entire system changes. So and pregnancy and maternal health as well as pediatric trials are very rare. They are a niche market. Very few people are comfortable doing them. A lot of people are afraid to poke small children with needles and to give drugs to them looking for side effects. And it is a skill that we have, and we've been doing this for many years. And we are quite proud of the amount of work we've done, because a lot of it changes guidelines. A lot of it results in medication that has been registered for use in pediatric and maternal populations, and has changed the lives of our children and our moms. And this is why we do the work that we do, is to give people better options and to give people better access to healthcare. Okay. So just to give you an idea of some of the trials we usually run randomized control trials, which means you take a group of patients and you split them into a group where you give them either the treatment or you give them a control, which is usually either nothing or a drug that you know works in a specific way. And then you follow those up and you compare results. So this is generally what's called a randomized control group trial. Or we do our observational studies, which is basically take groups of people, one does the one thing, one does the other thing, and you just look at them without interacting too much or changing their environment very much at all. And then what we do specifically are pharmacokinetic trials, which measures the amount of a drug that is in the bloodstream of a participant at specific time points. And these trials are very important in order to understand how a drug works in someone's body, as well as what side effects potentially they get at specific drug levels. So we do these in our pediatric populations often because we want to understand whether the doses that are being used in adults are sufficient, or whether the dose requires to be dropped for a pediatric population, as well as what a level of a specific drug is required in order for it to be as efficacious in a child as it is in an adult without causing significant side effects. These trials are usually quite small in number. We have one that we're running today, and it's quite a time-consuming process. The little one is going to be here for more than 12 hours in the day. We started at 6:30 this morning, and she'll probably only get to go home at 7 this evening. with her granny, and she'll have to be here tomorrow morning at 6:30 again for her 24-hour dose sample to be taken. So quite a lot of work that goes into these particular studies, obviously both from the patient side as well as from us. Okay. So just some of the things that we do as WITS RHI in terms of interacting with the communities at large. We've got a Facebook page called Research Connect, which is easy to find. And some of the things we do is spread information about health access, health literacy, specifically right now about vaccine literacy. And some of the other things we do on this particular Facebook page is let information be sent out to people around what particular trials are currently running at the site, as well as contact the site if you were interested in those particular trials. And, obviously myth busting is one of the things that is very important right now because there's a lot of fake news around and it's hard to control that information. Okay. So in general, patients don't specifically benefit from trials, or that's not what trials are designed for. The participants may have access to some new treatments which may not be available in the normal setting. They may be able to get treatment that may or may not be more effective than a standard approach, but in a research trial, that's not something you know up front. They may get closer monitoring and advice and care from doctors who tend to get to know them very well. They may get the opportunity to benefit from a new method, which is currently under study. And they may be able to play an active role both in their own healthcare and get a greater understanding for their own disease and condition. But the biggest aim for being part of a clinical trial is to help others, to help society, to move results forward, to understand information, to register drugs, to change guidelines, and to make life better for the greater good of others. And that is why we do what we do. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for giving me this opportunity and to my team who is 150 strong and work hard every day, especially in this COVID environment where life is currently quite tough. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Patel. I'm sure that that's some very, very useful information for a lot of our patients that have been watching, and I do see that we do have some comments, etc., coming in that I look forward to getting into in the Q&A section. But lastly, I'm going to hand over to Annalie Brits, who is the Associate Director and PRO of an international company, who's going to be giving us yet another perspective on clinical trials and what we can expect. Annalie, over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Will you just enable my screen sharing, please?
Sorry, again, not... I have no idea why this is happening. Okay, there we go. Try now, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so my part that I was asked to talk about is clinical trial development. How do I get this part gone? I'm not sure. Do that. Okay. Was clinical trial development, and you will understand how important the different phases are because all three of us got it in our talk. So I'm not going to bore you a lot to stand still on the subject of the different phases, but that is where it actually starts. Like the first speaker said, and Dr. Patel said, there's first the discovery and preclinical phase, then phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. After that, you get FDA approval and the medication is registered, and then there's a 4th phase after that. Okay, so a huge number of compounds are discovered on a daily basis and investigated by scientists. Only a very small number of these compounds proved to be worthy to continue to investigate and continue with in vitro testing, and that's laboratory testing. If the compound goes through the in vitro or laboratory testing and it's found to be valuable, then it goes to phase 1. First in human healthy volunteers, small number of people, usually only 1 or 2 people at a time. It's a fact-finding phase. the major aim is to determine if it's a safe to use in humans. It's highly controlled environment and start with small doses and wait to see if it's safe. And they also identified side effects in this phase. Then it goes to your little bigger trial. That's your phase 2 trial. It's still a small group of people, usually 100 to 300 patients with the same type of condition or disease. They get the new treatment in a phase 2 study. They're using the dose, and they use this part of the study to find the dose and method found to be the safest and most effective in phase 1 studies. In a phase 2 trial, all the volunteers usually get the same dose. Okay, phase 3, we look at efficacy. Is this treatment effective or more effective than other treatments? Is it safer or more safer than other treatments? And it's usually a large population of people. It can be in one country, but usually it's globally over many different sites to get the data and to make sure that this medication is going to work. Okay. Then you get the last part of it, and that's usually after registration, where your doctor will prescribe your medication and he will report any risk or benefits or anything that he picks up in this phase. He needs to send to SAPRA, and that will usually get added to the medication info. Okay, so how is a clinical trial developed? As soon as a company have a viable compound, then they move to the research phase of the compound. The team writes a protocol, ensure that is a study Bible. If it's not written there, it doesn't happen. If it tells you to do something, you do exactly what they tell you to do. You don't change it. The study leads at the company send out feasibility questionnaires to different trial site organizations or single sites globally or locally. As soon as they receive back the feedback from the sites, they then make contact with the site and go to the next step to do a site selection visit. At this visit, the aim is to ensure that the studies team understands the study, they have the necessary training, they have the necessary equipment to do this study in a safe way. And they will also look if that site do have participants needed in the study. Then the site will receive a site selection letter. After the site selection visit, they will receive a site selection visit, and then this thing starts happening all at once. You have to just submit the documents to get the study. You send it to SAPRA on ethics for approval of the sites and the investigators as well as the study protocol. And in the meantime, the sites then start to develop recruitment plans and building their funnels. Usually in this stage is when they start advertising, they're looking at the databases, and they start contacting people to ask, are you interested in the study? But they will not tell you too much before the study is approved. Okay. Also, what's happening to ensure that you are safe during a study is training. The investigators and the site staff start with study-specific clinical trainings for that specific protocol. The sites develop source templates to collect all the data needed. Then, when all approvals are received from SAPRA and ethics committee, then the sites are activated and start with the study visits. This is usually when you get contacted and they book you a visit at a site. There are not always, this can differ a little bit where 2 visits happen in one, but usually you have a screening visit where safety tests are done before the study medication is administered the first time to a person to make sure that this will not harm you in any way. Sometimes if you have underlying diseases, you might not be suitable for the study. So don't feel bad if you want to participate in a study and the investigator tells you that you will not be able to participate and we need to screen fail you, that's for your own safety and no other reason. Then the next step is the randomization visit. That's the official activation of the study medication. It's an active part of the study. And then the team will start to collect all symptoms, side effects while you're on a study. Anything you need to use your medication, they will look, do you use your medication? But please, your responsibility is to report anything that you experience during the time while taking medication. And if I say anything, I mean anything. I had an investigator who reported on a study years ago, the patient is more windy than before because the patient was complaining that she's got a lot of flatulence. So it's so important. Did you ever see those inserts that comes in the medication boxes? This is the data that the teams collect during the study, and those side effects are listed on those inserts in the medication. They're usually as long as your arm, but they are listed from important to less important. So please, you will not get all the side effects. You might get one or nothing, but usually you don't get all the side effects of the medication. So some people prefer not to read it. Other people read it and they get all the side effects, and others read it and said, as long as I don't get it. Okay. All the data are recorded that are gathered by the team, the investigators, in electronic systems in a systematic manner. This goes to the sponsor, and this is what the sponsor uses to do data analysis and also to do safety monitoring. Just to put you at ease, during the study, if you go to hospital for any reason, this needs to be reported within 24 hours. The investigator needs to get all the information from the hospital. Why were you admitted? What was the symptoms? What medication or treatments that you get? What tests were run? All of this then gets sent to the sponsor, the safety committee, and they need to analyze the information and decide, is it still safe to continue with this study, or do they need to call a pause on the study? It depends on what exactly happened and if it's IP related or medication related from the study. They sometimes have to call a pause on the study. Okay, I know Tulong also mentioned to you the clinical trial register. I've put all there for you to find it. So where can I find a clinical trial I might benefit from? And this is quite easy to do because we have a South African clinical trial register on the internet. So you just go to that email address and then that site address, and then you see in front of you, I've made a screen print for you. You can decide, do you want to look at all recruiting studies or not yet recruiting studies? You put in a condition or a disease. You can put in some other criteria like age, anything, a specific investigator name, anything else you want to search, and the country. And then you push search and it will show you all the clinical studies in South Africa, if you search for South Africa, that are actively enrolling or are soon to enroll patients in a study. So if you've got a rare disease, let's say like NASH, which is a liver condition, a non-alcoholic liver condition, you can put in NASH, you search NASH, and then you can put in the country and you will find all the studies that's currently for that condition. actively enrolling. Some of them also give you the sites, but you can then search on the internet for clinical trial sites. There are quite a few in South Africa. I'm part of an international clinical site organization. We have branches in Cape Town, Pretoria, quite a few of affiliated sites in all the provinces. So if you then get a clinical trial organization, you can phone them, or you can look on Facebook. That also, everybody also advertise on Facebook, and you can make contact with them in that way. You complete a little form and they will send you the information, or they will then make contact with you as soon as you've submitted it to the Facebook sites. I'm not sure if there's anything else, but thank you very much for your time and the privilege to speak to you. And you're very welcome to ask questions, and I'll answer as properly as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Annalie. It's so interesting, and I have seen a ton of questions. Just simply because of where I am in the background noise, I've asked my colleague Megan to come on to facilitate the Q&A session, because I can either hear you with my earphones in, or you can hear me with my earphones off. So I've asked Megan to facilitate the Q&A session. So Megs, if you wouldn't mind. I have seen a ton of stuff coming through on Facebook, which is really great. And you can see the content of the questions are really patient related. And it just shows the lack of real depth and understanding in clinical trials. So I think that this is going to be a really good Q&A session. Megs, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone to all our speakers for this amazing information. I'm going to go back over the questions that have been answered first, just so the people who are watching this through Facebook can also see the answers. So the first question was, how do you join a clinical trial? Can you request to join yourself, or do you need to be referred?
Can I answer that for you?
Yes, please.
How do you join? You can request to join by, like I said, on Facebook. Usually there's a little questionnaire that you can complete, or you can phone the clinical site. If you know of a clinical site close to you, you can ask them what studies are they running, you're interested to becoming a participant. If they don't have an active study, the norm is to put you on the database with your consent, and then to contact you should there be a clinical study that you might benefit from. Yes.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is, any trials done, for instance, for COVID vaccines for people who suffer from chronic illnesses? Now there's lots of pressure for everyone to get vaccines, but many might just be too scared.
Hi, Megan, I can take that one. So originally, when we first started doing COVID vaccine trials, obviously we were very scared. We didn't know very much about this disease. We didn't know about the virus, what it does, how it works, whether the vaccines would work or not. But subsequently to that, we've done quite a lot of work. And our country has done amazing work on COVID itself, as well as COVID vaccines. And the most recent trials have all been quite accepting of participants who have chronic diseases, as long as they're controlled. So you just need to keep in mind the point of a trial is not to have a very sick patient on a trial who then gets either sicker or demises. That's not the reason for putting someone on a trial. So as long as your chronic disease is controlled, most of the COVID vaccine trials are allowing that at this point in time, mostly because we've seen that the COVID vaccines are very safe in the general population.
Perfect, thank you so much. And I think that is so important to remember, as long as it's controlled and your doctor is confident as well, because your doctor and yourself will know best how your health is at that moment. The next question is, are doctors aware of the clinical trials that are happening, and will they notify us as patients?
I will take that one as well. most of the doctors in the vicinity of clinical trial setups are aware. We do sign some working documents with them to inform them on what is available. Will they refer you? They are very busy and they might forget at that moment about it. Just look in some of the doctors' rooms. We also put down information that's very useful to patients that might help them to realize that there's a clinical trial, and then they can discuss it with their doctor. Alternatively, if you find something on the internet, you can go to your doctor and discuss it with him or her.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think, as you say, it's important for us as patients to also take that upper hand and do the research and not just rely on our doctors, because they are busy helping however many millions of patients. Why aren't there more clinical trials in South Africa?
Actually, a large amount of clinical trials. There's actually quite a large amount of clinical trials. It just depends on what that focus.
Don't be mean to me.
Do you want this one, fella?
Don't be mean to me. I don't know why there are not more clinical trials in South Africa. Remember, as a regulator, we accept applications and we go through them rigorously, as you would know. And maybe our timelines are not conducive to the kind of turnaround that we want, but we do our best. We do our best to approve trials that meet our standards.
I think there's quite a lot of trials in South Africa. Everybody is not always aware of them because you are not allowed to advertise them publicly.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's really important information. Will medical aids cover any of the clinical trials if there's an expense to them?
No need for them to cover because all trial expenses are covered by the sponsor, which is usually the company developing the product. So there's no expenses to any that needs to be covered by your medical aid, except your normal daily medical expenses that's not related to a clinical trial.
Perfect. Thank you. That's always good news to hear that there's not going to be an extra expense. What is required for children under the age of 18 to participate in clinical trials?
So for a participant who is less than the age of 18, parental consent as well as assent is required. So parental consent is when a mom or a dad of a particular patient then signs to say that they are happy for the child to be on study. In our context, it's usually the mom or dad. It may be another legal guardian, but in our specific country, this is a very difficult thing because our court systems don't routinely grant guardianship as well as other first world countries do. So majority of the time it is a mom or a dad. And a child over the age of 7 is allowed to do assent, which is a slightly child-friendly version of an informed consent form, because the child then gets to say whether he or she does want to be part of the trial. So a mom or dad can say yes, and a child can still say no. And if either one of them says no, you're not allowed to participate on the trial. And that's quite important.
That's really interesting. So you said it's from the age of 7?
From the age of 7, we have quite simple assent forms. And as they get older, the assent forms at 12, usually the assent forms are a bit more complex and explaining a bit more detail. But you're expected to sign depending on whatever your age group is, if you can. So this gets a bit more complex with a participant, for example, who may be 12, but at functional level of understanding is a 3-year-old. That would be much more complicated. And in those cases, specific notes are made about how much understanding the participant has.
Perfect. Wow. Thank you so much.
Just add to that, Megan.
Yes.
Yes. That is perfectly consistent with the Children's Act. And I think the public needs to understand that the Children's Act does give children rights to give assent to such activities. And with the whole brouhaha about children, I think 12 years and older, having the right to decide whether to take the jab or not, that is consistent with the Act, and that's why our investigators are quite comfortable to bring them on board. Thanks, Megan.
Perfect. Thank you. It's really interesting, and it's good for us to be aware of all of this. Can people participate in multiple clinical trials?
I will leave that to the investigators.
I'll take that one. Simultaneously, it is not recommended for you to be on more than one trial at the same time, especially if they're two trials that have two different interventional medications, because we don't know what the one medication does by itself, which is why we're doing the trial. So if you've got two medications that are not fully registered and they interact with each other, for your own safety, it is not advised.
Most sponsors also have a requirement that you may not participate in any other study before you sign. In the informed consent, it will also tell you that you're not allowed to participate in any other study.
The other thing that's concerning is the amount of blood draws that would be required. So if you're on more than one trial, you potentially will be given quite a lot of blood samples, and for your own safety, that may or may not be the safest thing to do.
And from a perspective of science, there'll just be too much confounding. You're going to have a whole lot of interventions, and when you get the results of safety and efficacy, you'd have to be able to know which cost which is not very good scientific research practice. So it just would not fly, even from scientific point of view.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Is there someone I can talk to who has already been in the trial?
If you contact a clinical trial site and you ask them for a contact, they can ask one of their participants who will be willing to share their information to speak to you. Yes, I think, or you can do it on Facebook to ask someone to contact you if I've been already in a clinical trial.
Perfect, thank you. And who will be in charge of my care throughout the clinical trial?
Dr. Patel, do you want to take that one? Yes, sure. So majority of the time, it depends on what the trial is about. For example, if you're on a COVID vaccine trial, it's very specifically around your COVID vaccine, and you don't take over your hypertensive treatment, for example, or any of that. If in our pediatric ARV trials, though, for example, we would be taking over complete care of the ARV treatment, and in that case, they become my patient fully. And all of their treatment and all of their care would be happening via my research clinic, whether that is requiring psychosocial or any other interventions for or any other side effects or any other medical conditions that the child has, that would be my responsibility. So it is trial specific.
Perfect, thank you so much. How long do I have to make up my mind about actually joining the trial?
You can take as much time as you want before you decide to consent to a clinical trial. That's also required by GCP, so no one can force you to put a timeline on it. As long as the study is still open, you will be able to still join the study after deciding to do so.
Great, thank you. And will I be told about the trial's results once it's over?
Yes, all participants, we do sort of debriefings with our participants after trial has been closed off and the analysis has been done and results have been have been published, for example. We do regulatory reports, and part of those regulatory reports will also include information that has been given to our participants. Another thing we do is our community advisory board, which are a set of people who advise us from our community on research and how the community perceives some of the work that we do. And that's another place in which we then disseminate those results so that there's an understanding of the results of a specific trial that both the community board as well as the participants have been a part of.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for all of your questions. I see that we have gone over time and I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to be handing back to Kelly now for closing, but thank you to everyone for your questions and for getting involved and really taking this opportunity to get all our burning questions answered.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. It's been super, super, super interesting. I think one of the things that has really been made clear, and I think it's something that we could probably also try to tackle as a patient advocacy group, is to try put together some form of fact sheets or like a one-pager on Q&As around clinical trials from a patient perspective, because I think it's clear from the questions that there's a lot of I suppose hesitancy in terms of outcomes, etc. And I think it's difficult to navigate as a patient, and we often don't get the opportunity to be put in front of experts such as yourselves to get clarification. So definitely something that we'd like to look into. I want to say, I want to give you guys an opportunity for any closing comments. Tulang, if we can start with you on closing comments.
Thanks, Kelly, and again, thanks for the opportunity for SAPRA to come in and give the assurance to the public that we employ very robust methods and guidelines in terms of ensuring that clinical research in South Africa is ethical, is professional, and be assured that the results that you get from clinical trials have gone through a robust scientific process. And yeah, that's all I'd like to say. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Megan.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Patel, any closing comments from your side?
Yes, I just see one additional question that's in the chat box, and I think it is quite an important question around personal information and whether it's kept private and shared with third parties. So this is very important for clinical trials, and confidentiality is a massive factor. So all of your clinical records are under a PID number, so a study identifying number. And we are very specific about keeping your identifying information separate from your study identifying number, as well as your other information. So anything that is sent off-site will never contain both your identifying details, whether it's your name, date of birth, address, etc., along with your study number. So that is very important for clinical trials. And yes, you may discontinue at any point in time if we do have that often. People move provinces, for example, and are unable to then commit to follow-up visits, and that does happen. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much. Annalie, anything from your side?
I haven't got more to add, just that I can see people do have still quite a lot of questions. And I'm happy to do a second sessions if you want to invite us.
Thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. To all of those who do still have questions, you are more than welcome to continue engaging on our Facebook page. Anything that we don't have answers to, we will obviously go back and engage with everybody and get the right feedback to make sure that you are fully informed. And further to that, if necessary, we will absolutely carry this discussion on, because we know clinical trials are essentially the future of new products coming to market. And for rare disease patients, where only 5% of patients have a commercial molecule available to them, clinical trials are obviously a very, very big part of our, our reality in terms of a future where we actually all have the ability to have a treatment available. So very, very interesting point for me was with regards to the pediatric clinical trials and the consent that's required, and some anecdotal information. But recently my son, who is obviously, he's at the age of 12, and we were discussing COVID vaccinations, and he being a an immune compromised individual with health issues was wanting to get his vaccination, and he made the decision that he wanted to go, and I dropped him off. I took him into the vaccination site, and he's quite shy when speaking to doctors. Well, I think he's probably used to me doing most of the talking in that environment. So when the nurse that was going to give him his vaccination started asking questions around and, saying, are you aware of the side effects and these sorts of things are possible, I kind of prompted an answer. And she looked me dead in the eye and said, ma'am, I'm not actually speaking to you, I'm speaking to him. And I was like, wow, okay. But I mean, and it was in that moment that I realized, like, it's actually not my decision, and that he has more of a right to decide. And it was quite an interesting moment for me as a parent. And I think it gives me a little bit of an idea on what my future might hold with him and his healthcare. But really, really interesting. And I think very, very important to understand that pediatrics can actually be involved. And in the rare disease space, we know that very often that there is a heavy reliance on pediatric clinical trials, as these patients simply do not live very, very long. So adult trials are not always possible in many of the conditions. And therefore, I think it's just an encouraging thing to know that there is possibilities for pediatrics to participate. So that was very, very interesting. And then also just in closing to say that it's very, very important for patients to keep abreast of their own health research. Make sure you stay in contact with centers around the world that are specializing in your conditions in the rare disease space. Sometimes there might only be 1 or 2 centers around the world that are focused on your condition. It's important realizing that doctors can't be everywhere at the same time. It's really, really important to realize that there's a heavy reliance on us to drive that participation and to drive those conversations, do the research, and obviously then discuss it with your doctor. Don't presume that they necessarily will have all the information that we need, particularly in the rare disease space where they might only be treating one patient with a particular condition. To all of our speakers, thank you so very, very much for joining. It's been so very informative, really, really nice. To the likes of SATAC, thank you so much for making this webinar series possible. I think it's been absolutely informative. And just to everybody, go off. Hope you guys have a fantastic day further. And really, really, thanks so much for participating. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to send them through to us so that we can have them answered. We look forward to chatting in our future webinars that will be taking place for the rest of the year as well as next year. And we look forward to engaging with you. And once again, thank you so much to our speakers for joining. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kelly, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.